Laura Bennett, Troy Steele, David Bennett, Maya Cross. Detective Ron Keller. 5 names tangled in a murder so shocking it shattered the quiet calm of Westwood Acres forever. It began with a secret affair between a suburban wife and a fading adult film star, and ended with a husband bludgeoned to death in his own home. But what looked like a tragic home invasion quickly unraveled into something far more sinister. Betrayal, obsession, lies wrapped in romance, and one investigator who refused to believe the victim's widow was as innocent as she claimed. What really happened the night David Bennett died? The truth is darker than anyone could have imagined, and it all starts here. Laura Bennett stood at the large bay window of her spacious living room, sipping coffee as she watched the neighborhood slowly come to life. The sun rose lazily over the manicured lawns and picket fences of Westwood Acres, a quiet suburb just outside Austin, Texas. Every house looked like it belonged in a magazine. Fresh paint, clean driveways, trimmed hedges, but behind closed doors, who really knew what went on? Laura's home, a pristine 2-story colonial with white shutters and a red door, looked like the picture of domestic bliss. Inside, everything was in its place. Cushions were fluffed. The hardwood floors gleamed. A faint scent of vanilla candles lingered in the air. It was the kind of life many envied, yet Laura felt like a ghost floating through someone else's story. She had once been full of energy, driven by a career in education and passion for helping kids learn, but after marrying David, she left her job to support his rising success in finance. At first it felt like the right decision. David was generous, intelligent and charming. Their marriage was filled with laughter and adventure in the beginning, but slowly, something shifted. David began traveling more. The trips started as weekend business meetings, then stretched into week-long conferences. He insisted it was all for their future, but he never asked if Laura wanted the future he was building. She filled her days with errands, charity events, and volunteering at the local library, but nothing scratched the itch forming deep inside her, a growing sense of invisibility. She noticed it in little ways, the way David barely looked up from his laptop when she entered a room, the silence during dinner, the kisses that felt more like habits than affection. At night she would lie awake staring at the ceiling fan spinning overhead, wondering how things had gotten so quiet between them. It wasn't that David was cruel. He provided everything she could ask for, except for presence, except for desire. In public they were the perfect pair, matching outfits at fundraisers, warm smiles at barbecues. In private, Laura felt more like a well-kept secret than a cherished wife. She hadn't told anyone, not even her best friend Maya, how lonely she truly felt. Maya would probably brush it off with a joke or try to cheer her up with wine and gossip, but Laura didn't want comfort. She wanted fire. That craving started to grow stronger last spring, when she found herself scrolling late at night through streaming platforms, looking for anything to distract her from the silence. One night, a documentary about adult entertainers caught her attention. It was crude, even vulgar in some parts, but one man stood out, not just because of his looks, but because of how alive he seemed, unapologetic, bold, free. His name was Troy Steele. At first, Laura told herself it was just curiosity, a distraction from the monotony, but soon she was watching more of him: interviews, appearances, behind-the-scenes clips. Something about him made her feel awake again. She found his social media, and against her better judgment, followed him. She didn't expect a response, but one night, there it was, a message from Troy, casual and charming. It was harmless, she told herself, just conversation, but with each message, she felt a piece of herself returning, the part that wanted to be seen, to be touched, to feel something real again. She never thought she'd be the type of woman to entertain this kind of behavior, but the longer she lived inside her quiet, polished life, the more she realized she didn't recognize the woman she'd become. Something was changing inside her, and she wasn't sure if it terrified her or thrilled her. What she didn't know then was that this slow unraveling of boredom and desire was just the beginning, that her fascination with a stranger on a screen would soon turn into an obsession, that her craving for excitement would spiral into deception, betrayal and eventually, death. She had everything anyone could want, but it wasn't enough. Laura stared at her phone screen long after the notification disappeared. The message was short, only a few words, but it sent a ripple of electricity through her. Troy Steele had replied. At first, she didn't believe it was really him. She double-checked the account, verified badge, thousands of followers, the same man from the screen, tattooed, muscular. A smirk always curled at the corner of his lips like he knew every secret you were hiding. Laura hesitated before responding, fingers hovering over the keyboard. She didn't know what to say, didn't want to sound like a fan or worse, desperate. But eventually, she wrote back something simple, friendly, casual, harmless. The conversation flowed faster than she expected. Within days they were messaging every night, then voice notes, then video call. It all happened with a strange ease that made it feel less like an affair and more like a secret life she had stumbled into. Troy was nothing like David. He was bold, loud, unfiltered. He asked personal questions, laughed easily, and flirted openly. With Troy, she didn't feel like she had to wear the perfect wife mask. She could speak without choosing her words carefully. He didn't care about social appearances or networking dinners. He cared about what she wanted, what she craved. The thrill was undeniable. At first, she felt guilt. She thought about telling David, about ending it before things got out of hand. But then David left again for a 5-day trip to New York, and she never brought it up. Guilt faded quickly when no one asked the hard questions. And Troy, he asked all the right ones. Soon they started making plans. He lived in Los Angeles, but offered to fly her out. She said no the first 2 times, but on the third, she booked a flight and told David she was visiting Maya for the weekend. Her hands shook when she texted Troy her arrival time. She deleted the message immediately after. That Friday, she packed a small bag and kissed David goodbye like any other day. Meeting Troy in person was like stepping into a movie she didn't know she'd been cast in. He looked exactly as he did on screen, larger than life, effortlessly confident. But there was something else too, something sharper in his gaze, a hunger for attention, for admiration, for control. Laura wasn't sure if it excited her or scared her, maybe both. They spent the weekend in a sleek hotel downtown. Every moment was intense. Drinks, rooftop lounges, late-night confessions in bed. Troy talked about his life like it was a never-ending performance, always on the edge of chaos. He hated being broke, hated working for other people, hated how the industry used him. He said he wanted out, but didn't know how. When he looked at Laura, it was like he saw not just a woman but a door to something better. She didn't know when things shifted from flirtation to fantasy. Somewhere between cocktails and whispered promises, Troy started talking about what they could be together. He said she deserved more than a boring husband who didn't see her. He called David dead weight, and Laura, she didn't correct him. After she returned home, life felt duller than ever. David had left a bouquet of flowers on the counter to welcome her back. Her stomach turned at the sight. She barely noticed the scent of lilies anymore. Troy kept calling. He wanted more. He wanted her, but not just her, everything. The conversations changed tone. They became darker, heavier. Troy asked about David's work trips, about the layout of the house, about whether they had an alarm system. Laura laughed it off at first, called him dramatic, but he kept pushing. He said they could have it all, that she just had to be brave, that sometimes freedom costs blood. She didn't know then how far it would go, but a part of her, the part she didn't want to admit existed, was already listening, already wondering what her life would look like without David in it, and what it might cost to make that fantasy real. Laura's world had started to split in two. On the surface, she moved through her days like any other wife in Westwood Acres. She smiled at the neighbors, waved at the mailman, and walked Max through the park trails every morning. She played the part so well, no one would ever guess that behind her soft smile, a dark storm was building. Every night, after David went to bed, she sat in the guest bathroom, with the lights off, and the door locked, whispering into the burner phone she kept hidden in a shoebox beneath the sink. It was only used for one thing: Troy, and their secret plan. The plan had started as a joke, a reckless what-if, born out of their late-night fantasies and frustrations. Troy had said it with a laugh, something like, "If he were gone we could finally breathe." Laura had laughed too, but the silence that followed stretched long enough to change everything. Troy wasn't joking anymore. Neither was she. Their conversations became filled with careful details. Troy wanted to know how often David traveled, what time he usually came home, how loud the house was at night. Laura answered every question, her voice quiet, but steady. She told herself it was still just talk, but the way her fingers trembled as she typed out the layout of the house said otherwise. Troy suggested a staged home invasion, quick, clean, in and out before anyone noticed. No need for bullets, blunt force would be enough to confuse things. Laura would be left tied up somewhere believable. She could act scared, she could cry, the police would never suspect the grieving wife, who survived a random attack. The more they discussed it, the more real it became. Laura didn't feel fear, she felt control. For the first time in years, she wasn't drifting through someone else's life. She was designing her own ending. Still, loose ends needed tying. Troy couldn't travel under his real name. Laura booked a rental car using a fake ID he had from his old side gigs, and she wired him money in small amounts over several weeks using an app on her phone. She also bought gloves, black clothing, and a new SIM card, each item hidden in a locked box at the back of her closet. She kept Maya in the dark, but used her as a cover when needed. One afternoon, Laura told her she was planning a surprise weekend trip for David's birthday. Something private, she'd said, just the two of us. Maya smiled and offered to dog sit. Laura declined, knowing Max would be shipped off to a kennel before the night. Maya never asked why Laura looked tired all the time, or why she flinched whenever the doorbell rang. She just assumed Laura was under stress. Everyone was these days. Laura's only real fear was David himself. He had started to notice her distance, asking if everything was okay. She gave him soft lies, distracted him with gentle touches and long hugs. She needed him calm, unaware. One night, David brought home takeout and said, "Let's do something special this weekend, just us." Laura smiled and agreed, even as her heart beat faster. That would be the night. Everything was in place. The night before the murder, Laura couldn't sleep. She sat in the kitchen at 2 a.m., staring at the fireplace poker resting in its stand. She imagined the sound it would make. She imagined blood, then she imagined silence. Her phone buzzed once, a message from Troy. "We're doing this." She stared at it for a long time before deleting it. The house around her was still peaceful, like the calm before a violent storm. She looked down the hallway at the closed bedroom door, behind which David lay sleeping, safe, trusting, oblivious. By the next night he would be dead. The storm rolled in just after dark, as if the weather itself sensed something awful was about to unfold. Rain tapped against the windows in soft, irregular patterns, and thunder rumbled faintly in the distance. Inside the Bennett house, everything looked ordinary, David came home around 6:30 p.m., wet from the drizzle, his suitcase trailing behind him. Laura met him at the door with a warm smile, a forced kiss, and a dinner that she'd carefully prepared hours before: roast chicken, mashed potatoes, red wine. She kept her hands from trembling by clenching her fists. Beneath the table, hidden under a white linen napkin, David complimented the meal. Laura nodded. She barely tasted it. By 9:15, David was upstairs in the shower. Laura checked her burner phone one last time. ETA 10:05, Troy had written. She deleted the message, and placed the phone inside a Ziploc bag, hidden in the bottom of the laundry hamper. She lit 2 candles in the living room to make it feel cozy, welcoming. The lights were dimmed, the curtains drawn. She sat on the couch and stared at the clock, every minute dragging like a weight on her chest. Max was gone, already boarded at the kennel. Nothing left to bark, nothing left to warn. At 10:07, a sound broke the stillness, a soft click from the back door, not loud, barely more than a shift in the wind, but Laura knew what it was. She stood up slowly, walked into the hallway and turned toward the stairs. David was brushing his teeth in the master bathroom. She called up to him, voice steady, "I'm taking out the trash." He didn't reply, probably didn't even hear her. Laura opened the kitchen door and stepped into the garage, where she waited for exactly 60 seconds, just long enough. When she re-entered the house, the silence was different, thicker. She turned the corner and saw him, Troy, already inside, face half covered by a black hood, his gloved hands clutching the fireplace poker like it belonged to him. There was no greeting, no pause, no hesitation. He moved with chilling efficiency, disappearing up the staircase without a word. Laura stayed downstairs. She didn't want to hear it, but she did. A loud thud, then another, a crash, a gurgled, wet sound, then silence. It was done. When Troy came back down, his sweatshirt was soaked with blood. His eyes were flat, unreadable. He said nothing, just handed her a roll of duct tape, and pointed to the basement. She tied her own wrists, loosely, then sat herself on the cold cement floor. Troy wrapped the tape around her ankles, just enough to look convincing. Before leaving, he handed her a razor blade, hidden in a folded paper towel. Then he vanished through the same door he came in, into the storm. It was nearly 3 hours before Laura worked up the nerve to scream. When the neighbors came running, they found her in the front yard, soaked, crying, shaking. She told them someone broke in, that she had been tied up all night, that she heard a struggle, but couldn't see anything, that her husband was gone. Police arrived within minutes, lights, sirens, voices, a sea of confusion. Laura played the grieving widow with the same precision she had once used to plan her classroom lessons. She cried at the right moment. She kept her answers vague, but emotional. She clung to the officer's arm like a lifeline. But as she was loaded into the back of the ambulance for shock assessment, she saw something that chilled her more than the rain. Detective Ron Keller, standing in the doorway of her house, looking not at David's body but at her. He wasn't buying it, not for a second. And Laura knew the real game had just begun. The morning after David's murder, the media descended like vultures. News vans lined the street. Reporters whispered behind umbrellas, careful not to step on police tape, as they tried to get a glimpse of the grieving widow. Westwood Acres hadn't seen this much attention since the mayor's embezzlement scandal 5 years ago, and even that didn't involve bloodstains on carpet. Laura was kept at a local clinic for observation. Doctors checked her vitals, offered soft words, and sedatives. She declined the medication. She needed her mind clear. The story had to stay straight. She repeated it over and over again. She'd been tied up in the basement, gagged, unable to scream. She'd heard footsteps, a scuffle, then silence. Hours later, when she finally freed herself, she crawled to the lawn and screamed, until the neighbors came. No, she hadn't seen the intruder's face. Yes, she thought it was just one person. No, David didn't have enemies. Detective Ron Keller showed up mid-morning. He looked like someone who belonged more behind a bar than in a police precinct. Slightly unshaven, tired eyes, a coat that had seen too many winters. But he was sharp, and Laura felt it the moment he walked in. He asked questions slowly, methodically, not aggressive, but calculated. He wanted to know what time David had come home, what they ate for dinner, when she last saw him alive, whether the back door was usually locked. She answered each question with practiced emotion, just enough sadness, just enough confusion. He nodded, wrote things down, but never once offered sympathy. Then came the small questions, the kind designed to trip people up. What was David wearing when she last saw him? What TV show had they been watching? Did she remember hearing thunder before or after she went to the garage? Laura's breath caught for half a second. She quickly said she didn't remember. Trauma, after all, was a convenient shield. Still, something in Keller's eyes told her he wasn't satisfied. 2 days passed. The official story in the press was home invasion leaves local man dead. Laura played the role well, even giving a brief, tearful interview outside the house, with a blanket wrapped around her shoulders. She spoke of love, of tragedy, of unanswered questions. America ate it up, but behind the curtain the cracks were forming. Troy had gone silent. No message, no calls. The burner phone remained hidden, its battery removed. Laura told herself it was safer this way. The less contact, the better. Let it all cool down. But the silence unnerved her. She didn't know where he was, or what he was thinking. On the third day, Keller returned. He asked if she could come down to the station to clarify a few details. She agreed, playing it cool. Inside, her nerves were a storm. At the station, he offered her coffee. She declined. He slid a folder across the table. Inside were photos, dozens of them. David's bruised body, the bloody fireplace poker, the torn duct tape. But what caught her breath was a blurry image taken from a neighbor's doorbell camera. A man in a hood, barely visible, but something about his build, his posture. "Do you recognize him?" Keller asked. Laura stared, heart pounding. She shook her head. No, I can't tell. He didn't press, just nodded again, but then came the question that twisted her stomach. Do you know a man named Troy Steele? It felt like the floor disappeared beneath her. Her lips parted, but no sound came. Keller leaned back in his chair, watching her with unsettling calm. We found his name in some of David's recent browser history. Thought maybe it was random, maybe not. Laura's pulse screamed in her ears. The web was tightened. She left the station an hour later, smile forced, hands clammy. As she stepped outside into the afternoon sun, she realized something terrifying. Keller wasn't looking for the killer anymore, he was looking for her. Laura barely slept for the next several nights. Every sound in the house made her jolt. She kept the curtains drawn tight, the lights low, and her phone on silent. Her face remained somber for the neighbors, sorrowful for the news cameras, but inside her thoughts churned like a whirlpool, chaotic, dark, inescapable. Detective Keller's question haunted her. Do you know a man named Troy Steele? She couldn't figure out how David's browser history linked to Troy. Had David somehow known? Had he been suspicious? Or had Keller simply thrown out the name to watch her reaction? It didn't matter. What mattered was that Troy had vanished. She had called the burner phone once, just once, late at night with trembling hands. No answer, no voicemail. She smashed it with a hammer the next morning, and threw the pieces in a construction dumpster, 3 towns over. But fear settled in her bones like a permanent chill. Keller returned again on a quiet Thursday morning, this time without a warning. Laura was in the kitchen when she heard the knock, 2 short, 1 long. Her stomach dropped. He stood at the door with a polite smile and a folder tucked beneath his arm. Just a couple of follow-up questions, he said. Won't take long. Laura nodded, and let him in. He made himself comfortable in the same seat David once used at the kitchen table. She hated the way he looked at the house, as if every wall whispered secrets. He opened the folder slowly. We've been looking deeper into your husband's case. Something doesn't add up. Laura's hands stayed folded tightly in her lap. She said nothing. Keller continued. No sign of forced entry. Nothing was stolen. Expensive watch still on his wrist. Wallet untouched. This wasn't a robbery. She nodded slowly, eyes wide, lips parted just enough to mimic confusion. Then came the hammer blow. We also pulled cell tower data from that night. Yours and David's phones pinged here, as expected, but we caught another device nearby, right around the time of the murder. Guess what name was registered to that SIM card? He didn't wait for her to answer. Troy Steele. Laura froze. Keller leaned in, voice low but steady. Now you've never mentioned him to us, but we did some digging, found messages, deleted ones. You booked a rental car for him using your credit card, transferred money in small increments, covered your tracks, mostly. Laura's heart thundered in her chest. She wanted to run, to scream, but she was trapped, caught in the lies she had helped create. Then he delivered the final blow. We picked him up this morning. Nevada State Police pulled him over. He had a fake ID, blood traces in his trunk, and a few of your love letters in his glove box. He's talking. Laura. Time stopped. He says you planned it all, that he was manipulated, that he thought you loved him, and then you cut him off. He's calling himself a victim now. Laura's breath came in short, sharp bursts. The room tilted. Keller stood and adjusted his coat. We're not arresting you yet, but I'd suggest you get a lawyer. He walked out the door without looking back. Laura collapsed onto the kitchen floor, her perfect world crumbling. Troy had flipped. The fantasy she built, the secret life she clung to, it had all turned to rust. The next morning, the warrant came. Laura was arrested on charges of conspiracy to commit murder, obstruction of justice, and accessory before the fact. Cameras captured her being led away in handcuffs, her expression hollow. Her face appeared on every screen in the country. The grieving widow was now the prime suspect. The truth, wrapped in blood and betrayal, had finally clawed its way to the surface, and it was uglier than anyone had imagined.